Let's see how to create a Laravel 11 project using Windows Subsystem for Linux or WSL. I will be following this blog post, to which I leave the link in the video description below. It does require some steps, but everything is pretty simple. So let's get started. First thing, make sure that you have WSL installed on your computer. I already have it installed, but in case you don't, just run this command. So right click on the Windows Start icon and open your terminal as administrator. Then paste here this command. Now in my case, I already have WSL installed, but if it's not installed on your system, that's all you have to do to install it. It will take a few minutes because it needs to install some Windows features that are a prerequisite for WSL, but all you have to do is wait for a few minutes and then Windows will ask you to restart the computer, and that's about it. After the restart, it will install Ubuntu on top of WSL, and then you will need to provide the username and the password, as we will see in a minute, because for me it doesn't have to install WSL, but it will install Ubuntu on top of WSL. Okay, so now it found out that it already has WSL, but it doesn't have Ubuntu on top of it, so it's installing Ubuntu. Okay, so it installed Ubuntu, and now we need to provide the username and the password. Okay, so the installation is successful, and we now have WSL and Ubuntu on top of it. The thing is, as you can see, we now have Ubuntu 22.04. That's not the distro or the version of Ubuntu that we're going to use. The reason for that is that Laravel 11 requires at least PHP 8.2, I think, but the latest version of PHP, as for today, is 8.3, and that's what I recommend to work with. Now, PHP 8.3 can be installed on Ubuntu 22.04, but it's a bit cumbersome, and for Ubuntu 24.04, which is the latest version of Ubuntu, PHP 8.3 is the default. So if you install PHP on Ubuntu 24.04, you will have PHP 8.3. That's why instead of working with this default version of Ubuntu, we will install the latest version of Ubuntu, Ubuntu 24.04. So we can list the distros that we currently have on WSL. First, let's exit from the distro we're currently in with exit. And now we're back in Windows. And if we run WSL-L, we can see that right now we only have Ubuntu. I also have these two, but they have to do with Docker. They have nothing to do with Ubuntu, so disregard them. Anyway, it says Ubuntu, but as we saw a minute ago, it's Ubuntu 22.04. So how do we get Ubuntu 24.04? So first, we can run this command, and it lists all of the available distros. So all of these are distros that are not necessarily currently installed on our computer, but can be installed. Now, as you can see, we have here Ubuntu, Debian, Kali Linux, and a few more. But if we only focus on the Ubuntu options, we can see that we have these options, and among them we have Ubuntu 24.04. That's the one we're going to install. So to install this specific version, or this specific distro, we run this command. And as you can see, we use here the -d flag to specify that we want this specific distro, or this specific version of Ubuntu. And it will install it on WSL. And once again, we need to provide a username. So every WSL distro has its own username, its own user, and that's why we needed to provide one user for Ubuntu 22.04 and now another user for Ubuntu 24.04. But it can be the same user, you can use the same username. Great, and we now have this version of Ubuntu installed. Let's exit. And if we list the installed distros, we can see that we now have Ubuntu 24.04 and also Ubuntu, which is the default version of Ubuntu, Ubuntu 22.04. I do believe that at some point Microsoft will update it and the default version will become Ubuntu 24.04, but that's not the case at the moment. And that's why we have to make sure that we install and use Ubuntu 24.04. Let's move on. We can now log into our new distro, into Ubuntu 24.04. And just to remove any doubt, if you want to ask Ubuntu itself, when you are already logged into your Ubuntu instance, which version of Ubuntu you're running, you can always use the command lsb release-a. And as you can see, we're now using Ubuntu 24.04, so we're good. Let's update and upgrade our packages. And now that everything is up to date, let's install PHP, some PHP extensions, and also unzip. Next up is Composer. So you can click on this link and it will take you to the Composer website and you can follow the instructions there, or you can just copy these commands. So this command to download Composer, this one to add the execute permission to it, and this one to move it to a folder that's accessible from anywhere in the distro, from anywhere in Linux. So we're done with all of the prerequisites. Let's go ahead and install our Laravel project. So make sure that you are in your home folder. To do that, just run cd. And now that I am in my home folder, I run this command. Okay, so it took about 2 minutes or so, and everything was downloaded and extracted. It's now time to develop our application. To do that, I recommend using Visual Studio Code. It is a very popular code editor by Microsoft. It works great for Laravel projects and has excellent integration with WSL. This is something that we're going to install on our host, on our Windows system, not on the WSL distro. I already have Visual Studio Code installed, but if you don't, just click here on this link and it will download the Visual Studio Code installer, then just run the installer and it will install it for you. And once you install it, open Visual Studio Code. We now need to install the WSL extension. So let's open the extension view, this one, and I look for WSL. And the first result by Microsoft is the one we want. So let's install. And it was already installed, only took a second. And now we need to open the command palette. To do that, we press Ctrl-Shift-P. Okay, so Ctrl-Shift-P, and here is our command palette. And here I'm going to look for this, WSL connect to WSL using distro. Okay, so Ctrl-Shift-P and then WSL. And I already used this option before, so it came up on top. So WSL connect to WSL using distro. And it's going to list all of the installed WSL distros. So as you might remember, we have Ubuntu, which is Ubuntu 22.04, and then Ubuntu 24.04. And which one are we going to choose? You're right, Ubuntu 24.04. That's where we installed everything, PHP and Composer and everything else. And it's now connected to Ubuntu 24.04, as you can see down here in the bottom left corner. And everything that we're going to see here is shown on Windows. So the graphical user interface is running on the Windows side, but the code itself, everything that we're going to run inside Visual Studio Code, will actually run in Linux, in WSL. So let's open the project of our folder, the one that we created in WSL, inside Visual Studio Code. So let's open the terminal. So terminal, new terminal. So here in the menu we have terminal and then new terminal. And if we list the files here, we can see our folder, the folder that we created and contains our Laravel project. To open it with Visual Studio Code, we run this command, code, and then the name of the folder. And it opens a new window of Visual Studio Code, so we can close the old one. And it might ask you if you trust the author of the files, so just say yes. And here we can see all of the Laravel project files. So we have our controller and our model, and down here we have our environment file and everything else. So work on your project as long as you need, and once you want to serve your Laravel application, just run this command. And we get a pop-up saying that the application is now running on port 8000. So let's open in browser. And here we can see our application served from WSL.